Number 11, we're going to try to resolve the discrepancy in the paragraph. Let's take a look. Wounds become infected because the break in the skin lets bacteria enter, and infection slows the healing process. Often bacteria-killing ointment is applied to wounds after they've been cleaned. Makes sense, right? You want to kill the bacteria out to clean it out. But we did this study in a Nigerian hospital. It turns out that clean wounds that were treated with honey, which contains a lot of bacteria, actually healed faster on average than both clean wounds treated with antibiotic ointment and wounds clean but not otherwise treated. So this seems like a big discrepancy because the infection of the bacteria is slowing the healing. So it would seem that the best way to speed up the healing process is to kill the bacteria. And that's why this bacteria-killing ointment is often used. That makes sense. The question is, why is the honey working even better than the ointment, right? The wounds that we treat with the honey actually heals faster. Not only, now that's twofold, because not only does the honey not kill bacteria, it actually has bacteria of its own, right? So you would think that it would make it worse. So why is the honey working better than the bacteria-killing ointment? We have to find something in the answer choices that tells us why the honey would be better. Again, even though not only is it not killing the bacteria, but it's also introducing bacteria of its own. Why should it be speeding up the healing even more than this ointment that kills bacteria, right? So we have to find something in the answer choices that answers that question. Let's see if we can do that. A tells us that wounds that have just been cleaned with soap and water, and that's it, actually heal faster than wounds that have been cleaned and also treated with antibiotic ointment. Now, that doesn't answer the question. That gives us a new question, right? A gives us another thing that now we're also confused about, right? We were trying to figure out why honey is better than antibiotic ointment. A is telling us, yeah, also, even if you just do nothing, if you just use soap and water, that's also better than antibiotic ointment. So we're still confused, right? Because we would think that antibiotic ointment would be the best because it kills bacteria and bacteria slows healing, right? So that should be the best for speeding up healing is using the antibiotic ointment. So A gives us a new question that now we have to answer, right? It's a little bit unclear why A would be true. And it certainly doesn't answer the question in the paragraph, which had to do with honey, right? I don't see how we could possibly answer this question without making reference to something specific about honey and why honey is so good for healing a wound, right? So A doesn't answer the question. It rather introduces a new one, so it's not the answer. B does give us some information about antibiotic ointment and also about honey, which are the topics of our discrepancy. But does it answer the question? Does it solve the discrepancy? Let's see. So B tells us that the bacteria found in honey are present in a lot lower of a concentration than that of what's found in the infected wounds. And it also tells us that applying antibiotic ointment to a wound rarely, if ever, kills all the bacteria in the wound, right? It just kills, let's say, 80% or 90%, but not 100%. Now, B does kind of, at face value, seem like it's taking us in the right direction, but it's not going to solve the discrepancy, right? It does kind of lessen the perceived gap between how good antibiotic ointment is and how bad honey is, right? Because the discrepancy, the whole idea of this paragraph is that it seems like antibiotic ointment should be amazing for a wound, and it seems like honey should be terrible for a wound. But why is it exactly the opposite? Why is it that the honey's healing it faster than the antibiotic ointment is, right? So what B does is it kind of lessens the gap a little bit, but it doesn't totally flip it, right? Because B tells you that the bacteria found in honey, we know there's bacteria in honey. It says, well, yeah, but it's not such a high concentration. It's a lower concentration. Okay, but there's still bacteria there, right? It still should be making the wound worse. It's introducing bacteria to a wound, right? Just because it's not highly concentrated, but only lowly concentrated, it's still introducing new bacteria, so it still should be bad for the wound, right? Why should it be speeding it up? And same thing with the ointment. Okay, the ointment doesn't kill all the bacteria. It only kills, 90% or 80% of the bacteria. Okay, fine. So it makes it a little not as good as we thought it would be, but it doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it worse than honey, right? So what this does is this kind of lowers the perceived gap between how good we would have thought the ointment is and how bad we would have thought the honey is, right? It makes the honey slightly less bad and it makes the ointment slightly less good, but it doesn't tell us why the honey would be better than the ointment, right? Because the honey is still introducing new bacteria, according to B and the paragraph, and the ointment is still killing bacteria, according to B and the paragraph. It's just not killing as much as we would have thought, and the honey isn't introducing as much as we would have thought, but it's still introducing new bacteria, and the ointment is still killing bacteria, so the ointment still should be better than the honey, even if B is true. So this doesn't answer the question, and therefore we need to look for something better. C gives us two pieces of information. First of all, it tells us something about honey. It says honey has properties that inhibit the growth of bacteria in wounds, including the bacteria the honey contains. That's pretty good. That tells me why honey might actually be good for a wound as opposed to being bad for a wound, right? Because we were worried from reading the paragraph. It sounded like honey is bad because it sounds like honey introduces new bacteria. But C says no, even though it introduces new bacteria, it also inhibits the growth of the bacteria that's there as well as the new bacteria that it's introducing. So according to that, it could actually be a net benefit because while it is introducing new bacteria, it's also slowing the growth of all the bacteria, including the new bacteria that it's bringing. So even though it's introducing new stuff, it could actually be a net positive in terms of inhibiting the growth of all the bacteria in the wound. So C does tell us how honey could be positive for a wound. Then, what's the second piece of information it tells us? It says, and antibiotic ointments damage sensitive wound tissue, which actually slows healing. So C tells us how honey, not only does it tell us how honey could be good for a wound, but it also tells us the other thing we needed to know, which is how could antibiotic ointment be bad for a wound, right? So it exactly flips everything from the paragraph, which solves the discrepancy, right? What was the discrepancy in the paragraph? We thought ointment should be good for healing a wound and honey should be bad, right? Honey should slow down the healing and the ointment should speed up the healing. But the honey actually sped up the healing more than the ointment did, right? The honey sped up the healing more than the ointment did. That was the discrepancy in the paragraph. And so we have to explain, why was the honey better than the ointment, right? And C tells us here's why the honey is so good, because it actually inhibits the growth of the bacteria in the wounds. So all the bacteria that was there before, the honey comes along and it actually slows the growth of that bacteria. So C tells us a way that honey could actually be speeding up the healing. And it tells us a way that the ointments could actually be slowing the healing, right? The ointments are damaging wound tissue. So even though the ointments are killing bacteria, yeah, but according to C, it's also slowing the healing because it's damaging wound tissue. So therefore, it's actually slowing the healing, according to C. So this exactly answers the question, right? It tells us why the honey would be better than the ointment. It tells us a reason why the honey would be really good, and it tells us a reason why the ointments would be really bad in terms of speed of healing the wound. So therefore, it's exactly what we are looking for. D is a little tricky. D gives us one piece of information about honey, and it says that the sugar in honey inhibits the growth of bacteria in wounds, including the bacteria contained in the honey itself. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it's almost exactly the same as what answer choice C also said, right? Answer choice C said honey has properties that inhibit the growth of bacteria in wounds, including the bacteria in the honey itself. D literally says that. The same thing, right? It says the high concentration of sugar, right? Doesn't matter, sugar, whatever it is, but some property of honey that inhibits the growth of bacteria in wounds, including the bacteria in the honey itself, right? Now, the reason C is better than D, though, is because C also tells you something that's bad about the ointments. D is not enough to solve the discrepancy. And it's not just because C is better, right? You always have to be able to analyze these answers without making reference to another one, right? Remember, there isn't two right answers and one is just more right than the other one. No. There's one right answer and there's four wrong answers. So the only reason I started off by comparing it to C is just to show you that there's an easy way by comparison to see why C does more than D, right? C really flips the discrepancy. It shows you why honey's super good and why an ointment is super bad, whereas D just tells you a little bit about honey. So it doesn't do as much as C. So when you compare them like that, it's a little more obvious to see why C would be a better answer. But even without making reference to C, let's just understand why D is not enough to solve the discrepancy. Right? What was the discrepancy? The discrepancy was that ointment that kills bacteria. You would expect that to be the best for healing the wound because the bacteria is what's slowing the healing. If you kill the bacteria, that should be great, right? And honey is introducing new bacteria. Not only is it not killing bacteria, it's introducing new bacteria. So that sounds like that would slow the healing of the wound. So then why is it that it's actually the opposite, that the honey, not only is it not slowing it, not only is it speeding up the healing, it's speeding up the healing even more than the ointment is, right? So D just tells you that honey, when you introduce honey, this sugar component inhibits the growth of the bacteria in the wounds, including the bacteria in the honey itself. So according to D, the honey is slowing the growth of the bacteria when you introduce it. Okay, so according to D, the honey's not as bad as we thought it was. The problem is, it still doesn't sound like it should be better than the ointment. Because you know what the ointment's doing? The ointment has got the honey beat, according to D, right? Because according to D, the honey is just slowing, it's inhibiting the growth of the bacteria. The ointment is killing the bacteria, right? It's bacteria killing ointment. So D is just telling you, yeah, the honey's good because it's slowing the growth of the bacteria. Well, yeah, but guess what? Bacteria killing ointment kills the bacteria. That should be even better. So D doesn't tell you why the honey should be better than the bacteria killing ointment. It just tells you why the honey might be good, might be better than we thought it was, right? But according to D, the bacteria killing ointment should still be better, right? Because again, just one last time, because it doesn't just slow the growth of the bacteria, it kills the bacteria. It's literally in the name, bacteria killing ointment, right? Antibiotic ointment, that's what it does. It kills the bacteria. It says so in the paragraph, right? So therefore, D is not enough to know why the honey should be better than that, right? And therefore, that's not enough to answer the question. We need the two pieces of information that C gives us in order to really solve the discrepancy, which is that not only here's why honey is good, but also here's why ointment is really bad. Meaning, even though ointment seems like it should be a lot better than honey, here's a reason why, even though ointment kills the bacteria, but it also has some other negative, very negative effects. It damages the wound tissue. It actually slows healing in a different way. So C gives you that information that you need in order to really flip the script to show why actually honey is actually better than ointments. Therefore, D is not going to be sufficient to be the right answer. E tells us that this ointment used in the study damages sensitive tissue in wounds, which slows healing. So this is good. It's telling us a reason why the ointment is actually bad for healing, which is the right direction that we want to go. And then it says, but honey does not have this effect if the wound has been clean. Okay, so E kind of gets us half of the way there because it does tell us something bad about the ointment that the honey doesn't do, right? We're trying to figure out why honey speeds up the healing more than the ointment does. Now, the problem with E is that it only gets us half of the way there because it tells us, yeah, the ointment, even though it kills the bacteria, but it also damages sensitive tissue in the wounds, which slows healing. Honey doesn't have that effect, so honey doesn't slow the healing in that way. The problem is the honey does ostensibly slow the healing in another way because honey has bacteria. It's bringing new bacteria into the wounds. And as we know, bacteria slows healing, right? So we were very confused by this paragraph, as we were supposed to be, right? It's a discrepancy. So we were confused. How could it possibly be that honey speeds up the healing process more than this antibiotic killing ointment? Because you would think it would be exactly the opposite, because not only is honey not killing bacteria there, it's actually introducing new bacteria. So honey, forget about comparing honey to ointment or to anything. Just introducing honey to a wound, it shouldn't speed up the healing at all. It should slow down the healing, right? Because it's introducing new bacteria, which, according to the paragraph, slows the healing of a wound. And E doesn't answer that question. E tells us why the ointment is maybe not as good as we would have thought it would be, right? E tells us, yeah, the ointment, even though it kills bacteria, it also damages the tissue, which slows healing, right? So that tells us that the ointment has this negative effect that we were unaware of. Okay, great. And then it also tells us that honey doesn't have that negative effect. Okay, also fine. The problem is honey does have another negative effect, ostensibly, right? Because honey introduces new bacteria. So E doesn't tell us why honey should be positive for a wound. It tells us why the ointment might be negative for a wound, but it doesn't tell us why the honey should be positive for a wound, which according to this paragraph, it was. And therefore, that's still unanswered, and therefore E is not going to be the right answer. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe. And for thousands more clear LSAT explanation videos, go to masterlsat.com.